writers, you're listening to the Kobo ReWriting Life Podcast, where we highlight an episode from our backlist that will bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. I'm your host, Tara Kremen, Director of Kobo Writing Life. This week, I'm highlighting an episode from 2022 with best-selling author and trauma therapist Adriana Herrera. Adriana writes romance novels with unapologetic happy endings, and she talks to us about her journey to writing romance, representation within romance, and how her work as a trauma therapist informs her writing. This was a really great conversation, and I hope that you enjoy. We are here today with USA Today bestselling author Adriana Herrera. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Can you start by introducing yourself and your books to our listeners?
Sure. So I am Adriana Herrera. I write romance, and I always say I write romance full of people who look and sound like my people, getting unapologetic happy endings. And that mostly means that I write books centering Afro-Latinx characters.
Awesome. When we were coming up with questions for this, we were talking about how it's going to be challenging to do you justice because you've had such a multifaceted career and there's so many things that we want to ask you. But let's start with the writing stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about how your writing journey started and why you wanted to write?
Yeah, I'm a big reader. I've always been a big reader. When I told my mom that I was going to write a book or that I had written a book, she was like, finally, all that reading has finally paid off. Like my identity for my family is like, she reads. So I've always been a big book person, and romance has always been like a particularly part of my reading life that has always been comforting, like self-care, the place where I go for like softness. And so it had always been kind of like a niggling thing for me that I didn't really see all sides of myself in the romance novels that I was reading. I've been reading romance since middle school, and I'm in my early 40s now. So that's a long time. And I had never really seen a character in a romance that was bisexual, Black, Latina, immigrant person, and like fully all those things, right? And so, but I guess I didn't have like an urgency in terms of like wanting to see it and needing to see it, other than like I would write like some fanfic and I would write some erotica. Like that's the first thing I ever wrote really in like college was like super gay erotica. But like as the 2016 election really kind of like was the moment for me when I had like a call to action. I felt like I live in the US, I live in New York, and the conversation around immigrants and the place of immigrants in this country was becoming so painful that I just really needed to write these stories that I felt like, and I really do believe like in pop culture and specifically like commercial fiction, like is a real important tool and vehicle for like empathy building with people. Like it's a really, I think, impactful way to have a person really be able to like go into another's experience safely, because genre fiction has like the conventions are set up so you know what to expect. It's not like literary fiction that you don't know what you're going into. But with a romance, there's going to be a happily ever after. With like a mystery, there's like the killer's going to be found by the end. And so I really do believe in the power of genre fiction as a reader experience that can really be something that can build empathy. And so I wasn't as strategic when I began writing, but I think I deeply believe that if we had more stories that fully explored the intersections of people of color, queer people, immigrants, that is something that can, I think, help us all be better to each other, which is like way too deep, but it was kind of like my moment was when I was thinking about all that stuff. That's a really long answer. Sorry.
That's really interesting. I think what you said about, because I've thought about this before in terms of stories, but what you say about genre specifically is interesting because you're right. Like those stories are very universal. And so kind of going into the story, knowing what to expect, it does almost make it like it's familiar to you going in, right? So yeah, I'd never thought about it in terms of genre fiction before. So thank you for that.
When you felt that like call to start writing, was it always going to be romance that you wanted to write? Was that the genre where you found you were going to tell your best stories?
Yes. And the reason mainly is because I feel like again, going into the places where people like with my background are allowed to exist in fiction, I wasn't willing to compromise the centering the joy, right? Like to me, if I was gonna write anything, I wasn't gonna write anything that was gonna be like couch on our trauma. So I was going to write about our joy. And so the other thing that I read more than romance is like nonfiction. I read a lot of feminist nonfiction. So it was either that, which was going to take me 3 years to write one book, or I could write romance, which is what I felt I needed in that moment. Like in 2016, I needed joy. And I think we still need it now. Like we've gone from like one like situation that makes us need joy to another. So I feel like we all need joy right now. And I think for me, like romance is always that place where I can lose myself into something happy.
One of the ways that your books are a celebration of the Caribbean life and culture is that you talk about food a lot. Is that something that's just natural to you and embedded in every part of life? Or is that something that you really wanted to focus on weaving into your stories?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, definitely. Like being Dominican and, you know, having lived in other places in the world that have cultures that are like resonant, food is so important because food is how we gather, food is how we connect, food is how we express love. You know, like when my mother comes to visit, like that month, I don't even go into my kitchen because my mother is just like cooking for me and my family, like the whole time. So, and I'm going home next week. And like my mom just called me yesterday. It was like, these are all the things that we're making and all the different like meals that we're having with family. Cause it's how we gather. But as an immigrant, I came to the US when I was 23. I grew up most of my life in Dominican Republic. I went to college there and I moved to New York in 2002 for graduate school. And so one thing that has always been like pretty clear to me in terms of the immigrant experience is that even if our bodies and our persons are not palatable to everyone, our food is always a very good vehicle as like entry into American life. So like you can see like a lot of people may not know what Thailand is, but they know Thai food a lot, you know, and so to me, I don't know, any immigrant story without food is incomplete because for some of us, it's the one touchstone that we have to home. Like literally the one thing that's like smells, tastes, feels like home. The easiest. And also it's so much of how it's the language that people can more easily understand from us is our food. I'm giving like super deep answers, but I think about this stuff all the time. So
no, we love that. And I love the use of food in books. Like that's, I don't know, there's a few, especially romance, because it is so sensual and multi-sensory, I guess. And I think it works really well in romance.
Agreed.
And I kind of wanted to talk about the food in Finding Joy, because I was reading it and I was left hungry a few times. But this book takes place in Ethiopia and there's a lot of Ethiopian food in there. Did you have to do research? Does this come from personal experience in the Ethiopian food world?
So I lived in Ethiopia for 5 years. I lived in Addis for 5 years with my partner. We moved there a month after we got married and we lived there for a year. And then we moved away for 2 years. We moved to Honduras. We were doing humanitarian relief work. We worked for humanitarian relief organizations, just like Desta Joy in Finding Joy works for. The work Desta, one of the heroes in the book, was very similar to the work I did when I was living in Ethiopia. So yeah, and we moved away. And then when our daughter was 3 months old, we moved back to Addis and we were there until she was like 3.5. So we were there for almost 5 years. And we love that place. We have a really personal connection to it. And part of what I wanted to do with Finding Joy was really give a different face to what people think about when they think about Ethiopia. I think there's a very particular outdated sense that people have of what Ethiopia is. And I thought, well, the food is fantastic and the place itself is beautiful. So yeah, I didn't have to do a ton of research because I know the food well and I know the place well.
That kind of leads us into, I wanted to also ask about your non-writing career, because you worked for an aid organization. I believe you're now a trauma therapist in New York. Is that right?
Yes.
So how has that informed your writing and your kind of experiences outside of your writing career? How have they fed into what you like to write about?
Frankly, one of the things that I'm sure taking a sabbatical now, I took 6 months from my clinical practice just because it's been hard out here for therapists, y'all. So I'm a trauma therapist, and I only work with people who have PTSD because of interpersonal violence. So all of my clients are people who have survived either sexual violence or domestic violence. And I work with children all the way through like old age. So it was hard this year. So I took 6 months off, and I only work with Latin communities. My practice is 90% Spanish speakers. So I think the way that I don't really delve too much into like trauma, like graphic trauma in my books, because I'm exposed to it so much in my practice that bringing it into my writing, where my writing is kind of like also therapeutic for me, where I can explore like happy endings and happy outcomes. So I try to keep those two like rivers, like not to cross, because it would be too much for me to have to explore trauma in both of my jobs. But I think what does inform like my experience as a trauma therapist and someone specifically that does work around interpersonal violence is that it really gives me a lot more to work with in terms of how people are impacted by their trauma, like how people react to trauma reminders, like all the things that, like, especially because I write Black characters, I write people of color, and I write immigrants, and I write queer people. And there's so many things about our lived experience that we are like touched by trauma, right? So I think like I have a little bit more, a stronger sense of like how those things can really impact a person and how they like navigate the world. So in that sense, I have that knowledge. But again, I don't, like I was telling my friend, like maybe now I'll write a dark romance, because like I'm not like, listening to my clients' like traumatic experiences for like 15 hours a week.
Yeah, I can see why you need to write books that celebrate joy right now.
Yeah. I just want to quickly say thank you to all of the therapists who have been talking to us through the past however long this pandemic has been going on, because y'all are putting in the work, and I'm very grateful. Anyways, but I wanted to ask you, just kind of going off of that, do you have any advice for authors who do want to explore the more, I don't want to say like darker topics, but who want to explore domestic violence and sexual assault in their books?
Yeah, so I actually do a workshop called like Writing Survivors, Domestic Violence and Romance, like writing the stories survivors deserve. And what I do is like, I give some tips, but I think people should read about trauma. I think there's a lot of not great renderings of like PTSD survivors and like how PTSD works on people. Like PTSD cannot be cured by falling in love. Like I wish it could be, because if it could, it would make my life a lot easier and my clients' therapy a lot more pleasant than what is actually required for a person to process their trauma. So I think one thing is just like honoring that journey, because it really isn't, there's no hack for processing trauma that like gives you like a PTSD diagnosis. So I think definitely reading, like there's a few books that I always recommend. One's called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, and he's like one of the like most important people in the field. He was one of the doctors that actually advocated to get the PTSD diagnosis. He's been working with Vietnam veterans since the 70s. And the other's called Trauma and Recovery by Judith Herman. And that one is basically mostly for sexual violence and domestic violence. And there's a recent one that came out with a neuroscientist, psychiatrist, and Oprah, which is called What Happened to You? And Bruce Perry is a really well-known, also neuroscientist. He's one of the people who lobbied and was able to get past like a lot of legislation here in the US around child welfare. And so he has a lot of other books, but that one, What Happened to You, is like they really break it down to very simple language, like brain science and like how trauma reactions work in the body and like how trauma impacts a person's brain and resilience and all these things. It's a really good, like, I listened to it recently and it's a really good, like, summary of how trauma works. And especially like children, like one of the things that really I feel like we need to do better at is not burdening our protagonists with horrific childhood trauma, because horrific childhood trauma is very hard to get over without processing it and without therapy. And we just like, they were abandoned at birth and then they were put in a foster home for like 70 years and they got beaten every single day of their childhood, like all that, like you don't walk that off. So I think we should just do better at that. And I think reading some of those books will give you a really good sense of like what you can burden your protagonists with and what's like viable in terms of like having them be okay to go into a relationship or explore like intimacy if they have survived all that trauma. Sorry. Again, I feel like I keep giving super long answers.
No, it's great. People don't want to listen to us. They want to listen to you. But just building off that, do you think maybe more protagonists should be seen going to therapy when they are burdened with all of this?
I believe so, yes. I think we should normalize therapy and we should normalize antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication, all the things. And I mean, for me particularly, because there's so much stigma in communities of color around therapy and mental illness, like I make a point of like, I put people in therapy all the time in my books. My protagonists talk about going to therapy, especially the male protagonists, like those, because I really do believe, like, again, I feel like genre fiction is a powerful space for the reader to become informed about things because, we deliver in a way that's entertaining and fun and you know what you're getting by the end. But it's also reflecting the real world we live in, right? And so I think normalizing, I honestly, like, I said this the other day to someone, like, I'm just going to have like a lot of like, I'm just going to talk a lot about antidepressants in my books now, because we need to be more thoughtful about the way that we discuss mental illness, mental health, and like the tools that are out there for people to feel better. Like people should be able to feel better and feel good. And so I think, and like you can be on antidepressants and like fall in love, like you deserve it. So I think we should just do those things more in romance.
Yeah, I think this is such a valuable way to go about it because, like you said, it just normalizes it, reading it in stories that are commercial and fun and lighthearted that a lot of people are reading. And the more that you see something or read about it or hear about it, the more it just becomes part of the conversation. And so I think doing that is more effective than almost anything else that we can do to make kind of access to better mental health care, but also like people's attitudes towards it.
Yeah.
So you were talking at the beginning about how when you were growing up, you didn't see yourself in a lot of romance stories. And I know that something that you do with your books is you have a lot of anthologies and you collaborate with other authors. Do you feel like the romance space is changing or has changed a lot since you were growing up? I know we still have a way to go.
I would say, yeah, this year has been real weird. TikTok has been like, I don't know if it's a force for good or evil yet. Because I feel like, well, that's another conversation. Maybe I shouldn't be going there. But up until this year, I thought we had made really good progress. But I feel like, yes, definitely since I started even writing, I feel like there's been a shift, right? I mean, thinking about like this week, Tuesday, I had an anthology come out, which is called Amor Actually. It's a
best name ever. It's such a good name.
I know.
Holiday romance.
So it's a more actually, and it's basically kind of like we're reimagining like all the storylines from Love Actually, which is like a beloved holiday movie with all the problematic themes. And it's all Latina authors. So it's me and Sabrina Sol, Diana Munoz Stewart, Alexis Daria, Zoe Castillo, Soraya Cordova, and Priscilla Oliveira. So even to think about, like, when I started writing, that we could have like just an anthology with all Latinas that are all published, that we have, you know, some of us like have been able to list, award winning, like the fact that we've come far enough that we have a good group of 7 Latina authors that are published and have book contracts and are out there and have a backlist, like, feels different than where I started. And there's many more. Like next year, there's like a few more. Like there's a couple of Dominican authors that are coming out with new stuff. And when I started writing, I was the only one that was like a traditionally published author writing Dominican characters. So I feel like definitely yes. Like I think in terms of a shift, I think there's definitely a shift. I feel like there's still a lot more work to do because I think the readership also has, like, I think we need to bring more readers into the genre than what we have now. I think like visibility is still a big problem for people of color. I think the people that we're writing these books for need to know we're here. And I think it's like publishing in general, like becoming more efficient at selling books to people that are not white women. I don't know how else to say it.
And you're a hybrid author, so you work in both the indie publishing and trad spaces. Yes. How do you find the difference between them? Is it sort of kind of same problems in both, or do you find that indie is more open to, I mean, obviously you're doing your own marketing there, but I'm curious.
I mean, yes, in terms of barriers to entry, right, it is easier. It's better. It's easier in terms of you want to write it, you write it, and people find you. And I've been really happily surprised. Like Mangoes and Mistletoe, for example, is, you know, a lesbian, 2 Dominican women. It's done really well. People love that story. And that was surprising to me. I was like, you know, 10 Latina lesbians are going to read this and I'm fine with it. But it's been good. And I think, again, it's one of those things that like that story would have been hard for me to sell in a traditional publishing setting. And so I was able to just come up with this idea, write it, put it out there and let like the readers find it. And I think that in that sense, it is a really great vehicle, but there are still things like I was just talking earlier today with a friend about like mafia romance. And to me, like mafia romance is like an interesting thing because we were talking about like there is like organized crime romance with Black people in it, but that's not as popular. What's popular is the romance that has white heroes. And so we as writers and readers need to think more about like the reasons why those things are. And I think that those are the things like, and so for me, I mean, I'm not trying to write a mafia romance, but for me to insert myself in a mafia romance with the premise and with the commitment that I have to only write Latinx characters, like what would that mean for me in that space? And so I think that's part of the stuff that in indie, you know, like I went to a conference earlier this year, which was all indie authors. And I was like 1 out of 5 women of color, 4. And we got confused like multiple times. They would confuse us with the other. And we don't look anything alike. And so that's a problem.
Yeah. The one thing I will say about we talk about this a lot in the indie world is that whereas I think in other industries, there can be a little bit of there's one space at the top and there's one spot. And if you fill it, like there's no one else getting in. Whereas I feel like with indie, what you see more and more of is people bringing up their peers and saying, well, let's do an anthology together. Like, hey, if you like my books, you're going to love this author's books, like that kind of thing. So I hope that means that there is the potential to, once the ball is rolling, to keep the snowball getting bigger and bigger and seeing more of it. But I agree with you that we are.
And I mean, it's hard because with like algorithms and all these things that are really out of the control of the people writing the books and putting the books out there. But I do believe, yes, in that sense, like there is definitely more of an openness in indie of people to like, let's work together. Like people are a lot more open about what works. One of the things I love about indie is just how professional people are in the sense, like not that traditional published authors are not professional, but a lot of like the business side of things is taken care of by your publisher. But like the business savvy that romance authors have and how they manage their property, their business is honestly like amazing. And they are not stingy about sharing knowledge, sharing strategic things that they've learned. Like they're not stingy about sharing their learning, which is honestly really awesome part of indie. And I wish it was more of a thing in traditional publishing, but indie definitely in that sense, it's like, there's just not that territorialness, as you were saying. Like, she's like, this is the way I made like all this money, like you try it. And so that's, I think, a really, really cool thing about indie publishing. People are just a lot more open about like how they manage their business and like what's worked for them. And they're not territorial about it, which is great because there's a lot of money to be made in there.
Just kind of bouncing off of that, is there anything specific marketing business wise that you've done for your indie publishing business? Like specific, like the best thing you think you've done?
Well, one of the things I think I try to like not be an asshole, because when you're not an asshole, people want to work with you. That's one strategic thing that I've done. And I think the other thing is that I really try to stay within my core story, right? So like I write a lot of different things. Like I write historical, I write FF, I write MM, I write MF. But one thing that I do is like, the themes that you can expect in one of my books, like characters who are Latin, there's going to be some kind of conversation about like the immigrant experience. Like my themes are always the same in every book that I write. And I think that has helped me because I can move from one space to the other. And like a person that reads one of my stories can read any of my other stories and they'll still be getting pretty much the same experience, even if it's a completely different book.
Yeah, I was wondering about that when it comes to writing, because you are taking a lot from your own experience in your own life. Do you find it challenging writing male-male romance, or is it just another love story?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I've been thinking about that a lot because I wrote an MM this year. And for some reason, it was harder this year to write MM than it had been when I started. And my first 3 books were MM. And I think it's just because like the patriarchy's really got me down this year. But to be perfectly honest, like one of the things is like when I discovered queer romance, a lot of the queer romance that was out there was MM. And it really resonated with me. I really liked it. I read a lot of it. And I think it allows people to explore like a vulnerable side of men, which we don't usually get in fiction. And so that to me is like kind of what I focus on. And I mean, I think there's a lot of conversations that can be had about sexuality, desire, what we find sensual, why MM resonates so much with women, and why that is, because I think there's just like a lot more of a spectrum, and like these things are a lot more fluid than we believe they are. And I think women are just more fluid in that way. Like, for example, maybe a lot like gay men may not read as much FF as lesbians read MM. Like, I don't know, that maybe someone should do that study. But I think a lot of us that write MM, I think it's because like we're trying to explore something that we just couldn't do it with FF, if that makes sense.
My friend and I were talking about this. We were talking about why women like MM romance so much. And we had this theory that it could be like this, and this is just a wild theory, but it allows women to explore men and explore like their sexuality and their attraction to men without there being a power dynamic of the patriarchy playing into it, because there's no like gender dynamics there. I don't know. This is just a weird theory. I'd love your thoughts.
It could be. I mean, one thing that I've always thought about, and it's something that I was very consciously aware of when I began reading MM, is that I could enjoy a romance, read a romance from beginning to end, get all the sexy parts, and not have a person with a body that I had to compare myself to in the story. Because when I read, a lot of the MF that was out there was like really beautiful, really thin blonde women. Sorry, Rachel. And that was something I could never be. I just can't be, right? I'm like a plus size Black Latina. Like I can never be that paradigm of beauty, right? But I can, and no matter how you insert yourself in the story, that's gonna come up, right? Like there, and like that feeling of inadequacy, those insecurities just don't come up if I'm reading about two men falling in love. And I don't think, and I honestly don't think that's something that should be dismissed when thinking about why MM works so much for women. And this is something I've thought about for a long time.
So it sounds like you are writing these books for women and that your readers are mostly women. Is that what the impression that you get from when you hear from readers? Do you think men are reading your male romance?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of men read my MM. I mean, most of the emails I get, honestly, from readers about my MM specifically are men.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, numbers wise, yes. I think most people reading romance and writing romance identify as women, but I don't have, other than them being Latinx, like the thing that I want to write is for Afro-Latinx people, but gender really doesn't play into what I'm trying to do. But I try to be as thoughtful as possible, no matter what type of relationship I'm writing about.
So you describe you always say about your books that you write unapologetic happy endings. What does this mean to you, being unapologetic about your happy endings?
I think mostly what I don't want to do is write a story where like the character needs to be like broken or traumatized in order to earn their happy ending. That's where I began. And I think that's partly because more in the literary fiction space, but like so much of like the stories of people of color, the stories of queer people, so much of it has been, just like a lot of turmoil, a lot of bad things happen, and then they get the happy ending. And I just wanted to be able to write a story where like I just focused on all the amazing things that we are, and then you get the happily ever after anyway, even if you don't go through a bunch of stuff. But I mean, I also write about themes like immigration and all kinds of things. So it comes up, but all that to say is that like you get the happy ending, and you don't have to like go through a bunch of stuff before you get it.
I like that. And we'd love to wrap up by asking you a little bit about the kind of books that you like to read, if that's okay. We have some quick fire book questions. Do you have a favorite book that you've read this year?
I recently I have a few. I read a lot. I recently reread Hana Khan Carries On by Uzma Jalaluddin. It's set in Toronto. She writes romance, and the book is a retelling of You've Got Mail. And it's set in Toronto, and both protagonists are Indian Muslim. And, her family it's a Golden Crescent neighborhood. And her family has a restaurant. And then, of course, a new family opens a restaurant across the street. And it's a very wealthy family. And like shenanigans ensue. But it's the only, I've read it like 3 times this year. And I absolutely love it. And I love very high heat books. This book, I don't think even has a kiss in it. And that's like exhibit A of how great this book is, that I've read it 3 times this year. And I think they don't even kiss. It is so good and so nuanced and says all the things that need to be said about the immigrant experience and how we're perceived, the stories we're allowed to tell. She's a broadcast journalist. The heroine is a broadcast journalist. It's just really great. So I really love that book. And I read a book called Girly Drinks, which is a history on women and alcohol I
just picked this up. It's Mallory
O'Meara.
Yeah.
It is really great. And one of the things that I honestly really appreciate that she did is I read a lot of feminist books. And this is one of the few books, a history of feminist books, of something that feminists did, that is intentionally intersectional. She has stories there about South African, women in South Africa, in Japan, in Central America. Like she really did the work of giving a global portrayal of like the place of women in the history of distilling and like in the industry. It's fantastic. I really recommend it. And those, I think, probably two of my top books. I have one more. And it's Run Posey Run. It's by Kate C. Wells. It's a mafia romance, which I don't read. But I don't know what it was about that book, but it just really worked for me. And I've read it also a couple of times this year. I think what I really liked about it was like how self-aware everyone was about the world they were in and their place in it. And it has the best oral sex scene that I've read in a romance, full stop. And it's just really good. Of course, it's got all the content warnings. So please go on there and check them out before you go in it. But I thought, I mean, like I said, I don't really read mafia romance. I don't really I can't read things without a lot of graphic violence because of my job. But that one just like really worked for me. So Run Posey Run, Hannah Khan Carries On, and Girly Drinks are three that I've really loved this year.
Those are great recommendations. Also, I love that you've done exactly what Rachel and I have been talking about all the year, which is keep rereading things that are comforting, because I've been doing that all year as well.
Oh, this has been the year.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a to-read list a mile long, and yet I keep just going back to like, oh, I know this one.
I've read the same Raylo fanfic like 72 times this year. Like I'm not exaggerating. Like I read it like every week.
Are you going to drop the title?
It's called Kingster, and it's on Archive of Our Own, and it's fantastic.
I will include a link to that in the show notes.
Yes.
I'm going to go off book here, Joni, with our rapid fire book questions. But you said that you wrote fanfic when you first started writing. So I was wondering if you have a favorite fanfic ship to either write or read.
I have gone through many seasons with fanfic. I started reading Buffy fanfic. Buffy, I think, was like...
Buffy is Rachel's obsession.
I talk about things that have like mutated my DNA. And like, I think like the first thing that like mutated my DNA as a reader, as a consumer of pop culture was Buffy.
You and me both.
Yes. And I think I have actually one of my closest friends she's a Black scholar. She did her thesis on girlhood and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I keep telling her that she should publish it because I think there's a lot of us out there that would connect with that material. It's really fantastic.
Read that.
Let me tell you, you're not the first author to come on and say this, though. So I think you're right. I think those people are out there because we hear this a lot. Buffy was very informative.
Buffy is huge, Joni. You should watch it.
Buffy was truly. So that was probably like the first fandom that I was like deeply in. And then through the years, like I've moved in and out of others. Like I really love Stucky, Steve Rogers, and James Buchanan Barnes as a ship. I read a lot of it. Recently, I've read a lot of Witcher fanfic. A lot of Raylo is a big one after The Last Jedi. Like I just really love those two archetypes. I've been thinking a lot about fanfic this year as a space for people of color. And I think it's something that, like, for me, like what draws me to the fandoms is the archetypes, right? Because like it can't be the actors, because if it's the actors, then they don't look like me. But the archetypes and how they could work for someone who is not like the actor that's playing them. So I think a lot about fanfic and fandoms, but my favorite this year, I would say, the one that I read the most this year is Peaky Blinders, Raylo, Stucky, and Witcher.
And just a follow-up question to that, Team Angel or Team Spike?
Oh, Spike all the way.
That is the correct answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
And just another rapid fire question building off the archetypes. Do you have a favorite romance trope to write in? I say people like enemies to lovers a lot. Enemies to lovers is not my jam, but rivals to lovers is something I love to write. Because then you can have like a lot of competence porn, and that's something that I really enjoy
in a book. And there's just a lot of opportunity for great banter. So I love Rivals to Lovers. And I like Let's Have Sex for Science, or like Teach Me tropes are really fun ones for me.
Love it. So you gave us a recommendation already, but you said that you read a lot of feminist nonfiction. Do you have an all-time favorite, most recommended?
So there's one that I'm just rereading now. It came out recently, and I think probably is the book that I'm going to start recommending the most. It's called The Trouble with White Women, A Counter-History on Feminism by Kyla Schuller. Okay. And it is a really incendiary title, and I appreciate it, but wish they would have gone with something else because it's going to be a hard sell. But what I loved about that book in particular, the author's white. And what I loved about that book is that she really presents like all the feminists who have been either women of color or LGBT who have been doing the work parallel to the people that we usually learn about. Like she has like a chapter that's just on like the suffragettes, for example, like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton, who were like highly problematic. But like she has like another person who was a Black woman named Frances Harper, who was working at the same time parallel to them. So she really kind of like just like frames kind of like the history of feminism with like a counter history. And so, like I said, I read a lot of feminist books, and I think this is probably the one that I've learned the most from in a long time. And of course, then there's like Audre Lorde. Like if you want to read about like Sister Outsider is a great place to start for feminist things.
That's a great recommendation. We will add that to our notes. Do you have another question, Rach?
I don't know. I lost track because I went off so far off book with my fanfic question. No, that was my fault. I really wanted to know. Do I have another question?
Favorite Latinx writer? Do you have one?
Like romance or
anything you like?
General?
Anything.
Okay, so in romance, I can give you a few of like my favorite. Mia Sosa, Alexis Daria, Priscilla Oliveira, so phenomenal. If you want to read a rom-com, just like read The Worst Best Man because it's actually perfect. And for Latinx authors, growing up, Gabriel Garcia Marquez was my favorite author. I just have read everything he ever wrote. It was the first time that I ever saw myself in a story or the world I lived in a story. So probably I would say he is. But there's others like Isabel Allende, Laura Esquivel are really good Latinx authors that I enjoy. Elizabeth Acevedo, who's Dominican and writes beautiful books. So there's many.
Amazing. Thank you. And before we close this out, where can readers find you online?
They can find me at AdrianaHerreraRomance.com. And I'm taking kind of like a little bit of a hiatus from social media, but where I'm mostly at when I am on social media is on Instagram, and it's at LaAdriana_Herrera.
Perfect. And you mentioned earlier your writing course about writing trauma into romance. If anyone is listening and interested in that, where can they find it?
They can go to my website. Okay. There's like the workshops, and I usually do a few of them a year, and I typically announce them or like post them on my social media.
Perfect. And Amor actually has just come out. Is there anything else we should be looking for in the pipeline?
Yes. In May, I have the first story it's called Las Leonas. It's a historical series set in 1889 Paris World's Fair. And it's a series about 3 like Latina heiresses that go to Paris for the World's Fair. That World's Fair was the first time that Latin countries were invited to exhibit at a World's Fair as independent nations. So there were about 14 Latin countries that came to Paris, and there was about like 6,000 people from Latin America that came as exhibitors. So I thought it would be a good liminal space to set a series with Latinx characters. And the first one is called A Caribbean Heiress in Paris, and it's about a Dominican rum distiller, a rum heiress, who goes to the fair to sell her rum, and she meets a Scottish earl who makes whiskey, and they end up in a marriage of convenience. And there's a revenge plot. There's a secret brother. There's a showdown at a ball. There's making out at the top of the Eiffel Tower. All the things.
Oh, this looks so good. Okay, we'll include the link to the pre-order coming out in May. It's great. Thank you so much for doing this. We really enjoyed it. I'm speaking on your behalf too, Rachel. This was a great conversation.
I did also have a great time. I will speak for myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was super fun.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo ReWriting Life podcast. If you are enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And be sure to follow us on socials. We are at Kobo Writing Life on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter. This episode was hosted by Rachel Wharton and Joni DePlacido, with production by Terrence Abrahams. Editing is provided by Kelly Robotham, and our theme music was composed by Tearjerker. If you're ready to start your publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.